What if I told you that millions of people, including teenagers and children, are unknowingly taking part in an experiment? Vaping, which has been marketed as the safe alternative to smoking, has really grown in popularity, especially among younger people. But what do we really know about vaping and its effects on the body? Well, today I'm going to go over some of the latest research on vaping. So first off, is vaping even healthier than smoking cigarettes? I know people that support vaping will say like, come on man, at least he's not smoking cigarettes. And the point of vaping is to get people off of cigarettes. So at least they're being healthier. I mean, don't we always hear that vaping is 95% healthier than smoking cigarettes? But how was that claim even made in the first place? Well, the first report of that claim came from Public Health England. Basically, this panel of experts met up and decided to rate the harmful effects of different products, including smoking cigarettes and vaping. And for each product, they gave a score from 0 to 100, with 0 being the least dangerous and 100 being the most dangerous. And smoking cigarettes came close to 100, but vaping only got a score of 4. And this is where that 95% claim came from. But what got left out from this claim? Well, the authors even said that their understanding of the potential hazards of e-cigarettes was at a very early stage because they lacked hard evidence for the harms of most products on most of the criteria they examined. In other words, the claims that they made were just guesswork, and there was no real evidence behind it. Okay, well, at least these were experts making the claims, right? Not just random people. Well, at least 2 of the authors that were making these claims had connections to smoking cessation products, including e-cigarettes. This is a huge bias, obviously. So not only did they acknowledge that there's no evidence behind that 95% claim, they also had clear biases. But we're still hearing this 95% claim that vaping is 95% healthier than smoking cigarettes. So what about the most recent research on vaping? So I looked at some studies, and these are a couple that really stood out to me. This article was looking at an overview of vaping on reproductive health. So they included a lot of findings on vaping in animal studies. Some of the findings they had were male rats that are exposed to vaping had increased cell death in their sperm-producing cells, had more disruption in their hormones. They also had fewer sperm count and less sperm viability, and also more damage to their DNA. The study did acknowledge, though, that there isn't much data on vaping in regards to human reproductive health. But again, vaping just hasn't been around that long for us to get enough long-term studies on humans. This other study was looking at the effects of vaping on cardiac and pulmonary physiology. Part of the study had them look at 15 different human studies on vaping, and they found that short-term exposure to e-cigarettes, so about 5 to 30 minutes, can increase your airway resistance and also increase your inflammation in your lungs. And this is true even if it doesn't have any nicotine. They also looked at human studies in regards to the cardiovascular system. And here they found similar results to when people smoke cigarettes. Vaping use with nicotine consistently would increase people's heart rate. Vapes are also shown to increase something called pulse wave velocity, which is basically the speed at which your blood travels through your arteries. And this is something that similarly happens with smoking cigarettes, and it's a sign of arterial stiffness, of your arteries getting more stiff. They also found that vapors have more impaired endothelial function and more inflammation in general. There's also been a lot of research on mice, and they found that mice that have 4 weeks of exposure to vapor ended up having a loss of spatial memory and a reduction in their brain-derived neurotropic factor. And that's basically this protein that's found in your brain and spinal cord, and it supports your nerve cell growth and survival. And also low levels of this are an early warning sign of Alzheimer's disease. So what these studies have in common is they all say that we need more human studies, and we also need more long-term research. And this is part of the reason why we have so many animal studies, because we can do long-term studies on animals in a shorter period of time relative to humans. But right now, humans are essentially the guinea pigs because we can't have any long-term data yet because we just haven't been vaping long enough. But what's going to happen decades from now? We might find new findings. And this isn't anything new. This literally happened with smoking cigarettes. Let's go back to the 1920s. From the 1920s to the 1950s, tobacco companies marketed smoking as being good for your health. And in the 1940s, they even had doctors smoking cigarettes in their advertisements to show that it's healthy. But then once the 1960s came, the evidence was pretty clear that smoking causes lung cancer and no one could really avoid it anymore. But that didn't stop the tobacco companies. Instead of saying smoking was healthy, they simply started advertising these filtered cigarettes that could filter out a lot of the harmful effects. Don't get me wrong, very successful marketing, but the filtering of cigarettes has absolutely no effect at all, and there's no evidence behind it. Basically, what I'm trying to say is tobacco companies have a history of lying and deceiving its customers. But what does this have to do with vaping? I'm not talking about cigarettes, I'm talking about these vape pens. Well, you might be surprised, but these vape companies and tobacco companies might not be so different. In June 2023, the Observer newspaper posted an article saying that a lot of these pro-vaping posts on social media were being organized by lobby groups that were actually funded by tobacco companies. The general public or the young people that vape do so because they don't trust tobacco companies, rightfully so. And research even shows that when young people don't know that their vapes are produced by tobacco companies, they're more likely to do it compared to young people that do know it's produced by tobacco companies. This is a really big deal for tobacco companies because a lot of their business relies on these e-cigarettes. According to the Truth Initiative, in 2018 alone, the top 25 e-cigarette manufacturers brought in more than $2.5 billion in sales, according to Nielsen data, and 96% of these sales were from brands owned in whole or part by Big Tobacco. So is vaping really better than smoking cigarettes? Maybe, I don't know. Right now, I feel like we have more evidence to say that it's just as bad as smoking cigarettes than to confidently say it's better than it. Vapes have way less of the toxins that are in cigarettes, but they also still have their own chemicals in it. Also, most vapes still contain nicotine, which is very addictive. And you combine this with the fact that it's marketed towards younger people, a lot of teenagers are doing it, and even children are vaping. That is not okay. So if you're watching this and you like to vape, obviously I'm not going to recommend that you keep vaping. But if you do it and you want to keep doing it, I don't want you to think that it's safe by any means. Like I said, we have no long-term studies on it, but we also didn't have long-term studies on smoking either. And a lot of people thought they were fine and actually good for you until it was too late. And then people ended up with lung cancer or they died. I'm not saying that's going to happen with vaping, but I'm also saying it's not going to happen with vaping. We just don't know yet. So a new study came out and it was talking about this artificial sweetener xylitol and its potential to increase your risk for heart disease. Now you might recall a similar study came on a different artificial sweetener called erythritol. And I actually made a different video on that as well. I'm gonna put a link in the description below if you wanna watch that. But the main thing they measured